I now give the floor to the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic. You have the floor.
شكرا سيدي الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I should like to welcome the presence with us today of Mr. Geir Pedersen. I would like to thank him for this first briefing that he has just presented. Dear Geir Pedersen, today I would like to express my sympathy and my solidarity in the face of this worrisome amount of preconditions and refusals expressed by some, and I repeat, by some of our colleagues, while others have encouraged you to move forward in your mission and to carry out your noble task. And yet some members of the Council have spoken about a vast number of refusals and preconditions instead of encouraging you to move forward in carrying out your noble mission, which incidentally we approve of. Today, we have heard a stunning series of selective, flexible, mind-boggling opinions when it comes to the subject of your mission. And that comes around 6 years after the creation of the post of Special Envoy for Syria. And so, 6 years on, we continue to have these lunatic, stunning, selective opinions expressed over the mandate of the Special Envoy. As you know, the objective of these opinions is to stick a spoke in the wheels and to hamper you in your efforts and your mission. The objective is to put political pressure on you and to mar your objective reading of the situation in the country. That is why my humble piece of advice for you, my dear colleague, Geir Pedersen, would be to reduce the number of briefings that you deliver to this Council. So, Geir, that you can carry out your noble mission according to the mandate handed down to you, which you understand very well and which we support. Mr. President, the Special Envoy, during his visit last month, held useful discussions in Damascus. We affirmed to him Syria's readiness to cooperate with him to guarantee the success of his mission to facilitate inter-Syrian dialogue, which is Syrian-led, in the aim of moving forward with the political process. This political process is a Syrian interest, first and foremost, more so than it is in the interest of any other country. It is an interest of Syria. And this in parallel with the pursuit of efforts aiming to eliminate terrorism and put an end to the illegitimate foreign presence across Syrian territory. And again, in parallel with the effective maintenance of Syria's sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity. Any political process that does not take these elements into account will remain an unrealistic scenario that would have no political prospects. I say all this while reminding you what we want to hear in the interventions, or rather what we have just heard in the interventions from the American, British, and French colleagues, who said that the decision of the American administration to maintain an occupying force on part of Syrian territory was laudable. They lauded this before you, members of the Security Council responsible for preserving international peace and security. You, members of the Security Council that have a mandate to implement the dozens of resolutions adopted by this Council, which all stipulate that the Council agrees with the maintenance of the territorial integrity, unity, and sovereignty of Syria. You affirmed this yourselves in more than 20 resolutions. Nevertheless, we hear today the American colleague and the British and French colleagues express pride in the decision of the American administration to maintain the presence of 200 to 400 intelligence and marine officers on a very dear part of our territory. In this context, I would like to indicate that we stand ready to directly consider with Mr. Pedersen during his next visit to Damascus questions relating to cooperation between the United Nations and Syria, including the formation of a constitutional committee and the various aspects relating to that. However, it is now clear that those who are delaying the launch of the work of this committee are those parties that are interfering in internal Syrian affairs, the parties that are trying to impose their agenda and their preconditions upon the actions of the committee. In this respect, we stress that any action pertaining to the constitution must be founded on the principle according to which the Syrian people is the only party that has the right to decide on its future without foreign interference, external interference, and this based on the principle according to which the constitution and all related issues are a sovereign, purely sovereign matter decided upon purely by Syrians. Mr. President, the first paragraph of all the resolutions adopted by your august council on what you have called the Syrian crisis contains the following, and I quote, "The Security Council reaffirming once again its firm commitment to the sovereignty, independence, unity, territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic and the principles and purposes of the United Nations Charter." End quote. These are your words, the words of the Security Council. This commitment, which goes hand in hand with the common denominator, which is supposed to bring us together, that is to say, respect for the principles of the Charter and international law, requires immediately the following. Firstly, putting an end to the illegitimate presence of foreign American, French, and British forces and Turkish forces in all territories of the Syrian Arab Republic, and dissolving the so-called international coalition, so as to put an end to the war crimes and crimes against humanity committed by this coalition, including the total destruction of the city of Raqqa, total destruction, which took as its pretext the elimination of terrorism. They destroyed and leveled the city purely to combat terrorism. That is compounded by the destruction of a vast amount of infrastructure which is symbolic of the development of the Syrian people, and infrastructure which took very long years to build. Any foreign military presence in Syria without the approval and consent of the Syrian government is an unjustifiable violation that needs to be ended. We as a country look at this on this basis. In that context, my country categorically refuses the hostile and flexible statement made by the American administration affirming the preservation of a reduced force in my country, regardless of the pretexts given to justify that presence. Secondly, supporting the efforts of the Syrian state, those of its allies and its friends, to combat the remnants of terrorist groups, namely Islamic State and the Al-Nusra Front, as well as entities and individuals related to them. What's more, stop supporting these terrorist groups and work to return foreign terrorist fighters, Europeans and others, to their countries of origin and bring them to book for the crimes that they have committed against the Syrian and Iraqi peoples. The fundamental pillar of the war, the terrorist war that my country, Syria, has seen, has always been the phenomenon of foreign terrorist fighters. These fighters have been brought from the four corners of the globe to Syria. Indeed, more than 100,000 terrorists have been sent to Syria from more than 100 member states of this international organization. Around 5 years after the Security Council's adoption of Resolution 21 70, which called for the immediate withdrawal of all foreign terrorist fighters from Syria, a European official has just told us, and I quote, that the return of our fellow citizens who are terrorists from Syria represents a danger for our countries. End quote. This official has thereby taken the propaganda of its country about these terrorists by presenting them as birds of terrorism and as birds of peace and as moderate opposition. Another European official has just told us that these terrorists are, and I quote, the enemies of the European nation, end quote. Thus, this official is burning their country's propaganda over many years, which describes these terrorists as friends of the Syrian people, end quote. You will all recall what was said by the former French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius in Marrakesh on the 12th of December 2012. He said, and I quote, French jihadists are doing a good job in Syria, end quote. And I would say what Fabius said in French so that it can be remended.
Font de bon boulot en Syrie. وما يزيد الطين بلة.
Even worse than that, a third European representative considers that the return of these terrorists to Europe is an extremely difficult question, end quote. I would like to put this question to these European representatives. Why then the recruitment, the training, the sending of these European terrorists to Syria? Why was it so easy for some governments? Why was it so easy at the time to send them to Syria as jihadists? This lax view over the return of FTFs to their home countries and prosecution for what they've done in Syria and Iraq very much proves the fears that some have when it comes to the information that the terrorists will reveal as to the role of the states that sponsored them. This also reflects that these countries want their terrorists to continue to be a factor of destabilization in my country and in the Middle East. They also want to continue to invest in these terrorists and recycle them so that in the future they can be sent to other parts of the world. We're not just saying any old thing, ladies and gentlemen. At a certain point, the Algerian authorities announced that they had detained hundreds of terrorists from the Islamic State and other organizations on the Algerian-Nigerian border. And when they conducted investigations of these terrorists, it was proven, it turned out, that these terrorists had come from Aleppo, from Syria. Who sent these terrorists from Aleppo in Syria to the border between Algeria and Niger in their hundreds? Who provided the transport and logistical support for them? Thirdly, put an end to the suffering of Syrians and provide them with the opportunity to return to a normal life and allow them to meet their daily needs by immediately and unconditionally lifting the coercive economic measures that have had a devastating effect on all Syrians. These coercive measures have caused immense losses to our national economy, losses which go far beyond the value of humanitarian assistance offered to Syrians. Fourthly, work to support the efforts of the Syrian state to create an environment conducive to the return of displaced persons and Syrian refugees to their homes, their towns and cities in safety and dignity. And I reiterate an appeal to all of those who have left the country because of terrorism to return to the country and to carry out their national responsibility to participate in the rebuilding of the country. As you know, the fatherland is for all of the sons and daughters of that who sincerely belong to that fatherland. Our national anthem in Syria begins with the following verse, Mr. President. The high defenders of the fatherland, may peace be upon you, dignified souls refuse humiliation. These verses, ladies and gentlemen, demonstrate the commitment of the Syrian people to their political independence, their territorial integrity, and the extent to which they appreciate defenders and the bastions of the Syrian Arab Republic, the armed forces who have made vast sacrifices to preserve the sovereignty of Syria, the independence of its national decision-making, protection from any external interference, and any aim to undermine the unity and territorial integrity of Syria and its people, and this throughout decades, and certainly in the last 8 years. That is why the Syrian government, which has held fast over 8 years in the face of foreign interference and terrorism, is now determined to not allow through the agendas of hostile countries. We are determined now more than ever to recover all of our territory and liberate it from terrorism and the illegitimate foreign presence there. In parallel, we commit to working for a political solution where Syrians and Syrians alone decide on their future and their choice through an inter-Syrian dialogue, which is Syrian-led without any external interference, so as to guarantee the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of Syria. Thank you, Mr. President.
Doy las gracias.
I thank the representative